Hello friends, my name is Angela and welcome to my favourite books of 2025 wrap-up. 21,000 pages, 68 books, a quarter of which were non-fiction, 2 overseas trips and 1 incredible read-along with You Find People. 2025 was a very fulfilling and a very full year. While I read so many excellent books over 2025, I have to admit it was quite a challenge to narrow down to what I would call favourites, all-time favourites, highlights. And the fact that I should have posted this video last week should be an indication of that. I took longer to really come to my list. And unfortunately, it wasn't because I had too many favourites. It was actually the opposite end of the scale. I felt like this year was a little bit of a plateau, and there were only a couple of books that really sent my heart rate peaking, moving that needle up into favourite book of the year, favourite book of all time. And the fact that over 2025, my average rating for a book was around 3.8 stars, and that is because I rated so many 4-star books. They were good books, books that I enjoyed reading, but they just didn't push into that 5-star read for me. As in that they didn't really imprint on me as much as some of the books in 2024 had. And before I get into my list of books that are favourites, I just want to share with you a bit of clarity around my thoughts of that. First of all, 2024 was my first year on YouTube, so that was a different year for me generally in terms of reading. And that was because I was pushing myself a little bit. And over 2024 and 2025, I was reading through some pretty heavy personal seasons of my own. A lot of the books I read over the last couple of years had this continuing thread of grief and loss as I process things like this in my own life. And while those books were exactly what I needed in the moment, and they did their job, as of today, or at the time that I started coming up with my list of books that were my favourite for 2025, I feel that there is a distance between me and those books. They met me at that moment when I needed them and start a new chapter, if you like, and to look forward rather than look back. So I feel there's a distance between me as I am today and those books that I read over the last few years and this year that had those continuing themes. I also pushed myself in 2025 to read books that I thought I should read. And because of this, I had more 2- and 3-star books than usual. And honestly, there were a number of books that I should have just DNF'd, and I'm absolutely looking at you, Beartown. I had set a goal at the start of the year to just put down books that I wasn't vibing with, but, to DNF a little bit more often rather than continue and have this mediocre book in my life. But I kind of kept coming up against this wall thinking, maybe I just need to give it more time. But then how much time is enough time? Is it 50 pages? Is it 100 pages? How much time is enough before you say, that's it, book, I don't want to read you anymore? And sometimes that time helped and sometimes it just did not. And I think it's important to mention all these things because if you have, whether you are a new viewer to my channel or you've been here for a while, you know that when I talk about books, I'm not just giving my thoughts and processes critically around what the book is. I generally share how the book sat with me and how it affected me and how it showed up in my life in that moment. Reading is just such a deeply personal experience for me, and I couldn't imagine talking about any of these books in any other way. There is always that personal reflection involved. So all that to say, I'm going to share with you 8 books that have made my 2025 amazing. I consider these the highlights of my year. They left an imprint on me. I maybe still think about them and want to reread them. They are not all books that I rated 5 stars. I find that the rating system I'm very inconsistent with how I rate books, and I need to just go with I liked it or I didn't like it. But these are books that I will keep on my bookshelf. These are books that I would recommend to anybody regardless of their favourite genre. They are books that I will reread in the future. I will buy these as gifts for people. And these are books that I will look back on as formative in my life and my reading life. So let's get into it. I'm going to just share them in the order that I read them. This is no way from least to best or best to worst. The first book, which happened to be the first book I picked up in 2025, is Rapture by Emily Maguire. I have not seen anyone else talk about this book. Emily Maguire is an Australian author. This book came out in 2024. It is maybe her 2nd or her 3rd book, but this was phenomenal and such a cracker of a book to start my year with. I actually read it as a library loan and recently found it in a secondhand bookstore, so I picked it up because I most definitely want to reread it and I want to keep it on my shelf. And Rapture is a really captivating and elegantly written retelling of the story of Pope Joan, which is a myth and a legend that before reading this book I did not know anything about. First of all, I fell in love with Maguire's writing. It is very unique and poetic and lyrical, and I fell in love with it immediately. And perhaps I at the time, I hadn't read anything like her style of writing until another book that is in this list. So it was quite unique to me at that time. Rapture is the story of a girl named Agnes, who is a motherless child she has her dad who is an English priest, and they are in 9th century Mainz, Germany. She's a little wild, she's a little unkempt without a motherly figure in her life, but she is very intelligent and she has a deep connection and a love of God. When she's 18, she enlists the help of a Benedictine monk to help her disguise herself as a priest and to live in a monastery, and to devote her life to religious study. Otherwise, her only two courses in life was really to be a wife and a mother or a nun. And in the 9th century in Europe, to be a scholar around religious texts, she most definitely had to be a man. So this begins her new life as John the Englishman, and she becomes an unmatched scholar and scribe in her monastery, and then she travels through Europe and really dazzles everyone with her intelligence and her understanding of religious texts. The book is really well and evenly paced, and it has a lot of themes around identity, of course, but also power, and the air is thick with a yearning. I would highly recommend this to anyone who loves historical fiction, especially because this particular era is an era that you don't get to see a lot of. Phenomenal. Brilliant. What a great start to my year. The next book, which happened to be my second book that I read for the year, I had some good ones in January when I was on my summer holidays, and that is Rare Singles by Benjamin Myers. And to be honest with you, I have never met a book of Benjamin Myers that I do not like. It was actually another new release. I think it was released in maybe 2024, and it is a really warm and tender story about unlikely friendships, second chances, and the power of music that brings people together. So in Chicago, we meet Bucky, who is very down on his luck. He is a recent widower, and he's just trying to make ends meet. He is dealing with chronic pain, but then an unexpected invitation arrives at his door, because it turns out that Bucky cut a record in the 60s. But for unknown reasons to his fan base, he disappeared. He didn't release anything else. However, he does have this huge fan following in Scarborough, England, where they're actually going to be holding this music festival. And Bucky's been invited to perform a few of his hits at that festival. And even though he hasn't performed in over 50 years, he really has nothing to lose. And so he gets on that plane and he goes to Scarborough, England. Over the course of this week, Bucky experiences new friendships. He is one of my favourite characters I think I've ever read. Everyone is drawn to him, but he is forced to face up to some hardships in his past and really come at them head on. It's such a beautifully done book. It reminded me of the story of Rodriguez, who was a musician in, I think, the 60s, maybe the 70s in America, and possibly actually from Chicago as well, who created a record or two and didn't get any traction in the States, and so he stopped playing music. And then a few decades later, he found out that he was actually huge in other parts of the world. I think in South Africa, he outsold Elvis records. So he realized he had this huge fan base. And there was a documentary about him called Looking for Sugar Man, and I highly recommend it. But I wonder how much Benjamin Myers, if any, took from that story, because it did feel a little bit like there was a parallel. But at this stage, I will read anything by Benjamin Myers. He is an author that continually keeps me on my toes. And while he crosses genres, he is really quite consistent with telling stories about people, about relationships, and what it means to be human and the beauty of that humanity. He really manages to create a dialogue around beauty or pain, things that we experience as humans, and maybe we've experienced them, but we've never really tried to articulate it. And then you read something he has written and you're like, that is exactly how that feels. This was a really beautiful story. It's a very, very slim read, and it's ultimately about the healing power of music to heal and forge unlikely relationships. There is a beautiful little nod, tip of the hat, to perhaps my favourite Benjamin Myers book called The Offing at the end of this book. And I loved that there was a little bit of a thread connecting them, but it's a beautiful, beautiful story. Now, if you've been here for a while, it's not a big secret that I often tend to have a children's book on the go at any given time. It's something that I really enjoy doing. Last year I had a project around children's fiction and literature and classics in particular. And this year I decided that I was going to tackle for the first time The Chronicles of Narnia by C.S. Lewis. And I am very pleased to say that one of my absolute highlights of 2025 was The Magician's Nephew by C.S. Lewis, which is the first book in the Chronicles of Narnia, but it was published 6, I think. So this is a really fast-paced adventure, and it follows Diggory, who is the eponymous magician's nephew, and his friend and neighbour Polly, who stumble into various magical worlds when they are kind of tricked by Diggory's eccentric uncle Andrew, who fancies himself as a magician. I was truly transported when I read this book from cover to cover. I loved being in this world. I was enthralled with the story as we witness the creation of Narnia and we meet Aslan for the first time. That chapter in particular, I think, when Narnia was created and Aslan first came into the book, was some of the most beautiful writing I've ever read, and I really loved it. So I'm making my way through the Chronicles of Narnia slowly, but this is an absolute highlight for me. Now into some non-fiction. When I read this book, I knew it was going to be in my top books of the year. It was just an experience unlike anything else. And to be fair, I read this book in the same month that I read Hamnet by Maggie O'Farrell, Blackwood's Blue Sky by Eowyn Ivey, My Brilliant Career by Stella Miles Franklin, and this was still my favourite book of the month, and that is Where the Old Roses Grow by Janelle McCulloch. This was published in 2025. I think I bought it the week that it came out here in Australia. And it is the story, I picked it up for the story of Vita Sackville-West and her gardens at Sissinghurst Castle in Kent. So I came for that, but I stayed for these incredible stories of other writers, other gardeners, and the way this community persevered to try and protect these rose varieties, all while dealing with the impact that World War II was having on the entire country. If you love gardens or gardening, if you love history, if you love literature and you are a reader, I highly recommend this book. It was such a pleasant experience to read. And I quickly learned that this book is not just about Vita Sackville-West, and I came away with a long list of other authors or gardeners that I really wanted to learn more about, like Constance Spry, I think, is one that I hadn't heard of before that I do want to understand more about her life and what she did. The story is anchored around Vita, her husband Harold, and their home at Sissinghurst Castle in Kent, but it also includes a lot of information about other historical figures and rosarians in particular that I did not know about and I want to learn more about. The lengths that these people went to protect these rose varieties through World War II was really fascinating to read. This was a time where the government said, pull up your flowers, plant some vegetables so you can feed your family and the country. You don't need your flowers. But Vita Sackville-West argued that you can't just live on food alone. You need beauty to sustain you as well. And so she persevered. She was like, I'm still going to put in a lot of effort with this garden, even though they were literally in what was called, I think, the bomb alley as planes were flying over the channel into England. Gardeners are innately optimistic and positive people. To plant a seed is really to have hope in the future. And I really enjoyed the parallels that McCulloch made when she was writing this book during COVID and lockdowns and being separated from people, and how we found respite in our gardens in that time, just as Vita Sackville-West and her other rosarians also found comfort in their own gardens during World War II. This was so well researched. It was a 5-star read for me. I loved it. I truly loved it. And there's an incredible bibliography in the back. So if you are like me and you want to read more about the other people in here, not just Vita Sackville-West, but there's a great bibliography of other books that she referenced when she was researching. Now, halfway through the year, I did like a midway reading review, and I was lamenting that I was not reading as many good books as I had hoped to be reading based on my reading in 2024. So I finally picked up The Secret History by Donna Tartt. This book, I think from the first, like within 5 pages, I was hooked. The narration really spoke to me. It just kind of scratched that itch in my brain that really was what I like to read. And the characters are so full-bodied, the atmosphere is just completely evocative, and the plot was so well-paced. I thoroughly enjoyed my time with it. So The Secret History is basically a psychological thriller about a group of elite college students. They are under the influence of their very eccentric college professor, and they commit a murder that slowly unravels their lives. I think it's been described as a thinking person's thriller, and I agree with that. I loved it. It was not just a thriller. I found moments in there of where I was laughing. They were quite funny. I really connected with the narrator because it's narrated from a character who is an outsider who has come into this college, joined this group of elite students. And so it's all very new to him what's going on. I definitely found it funny at times, and at other times I was just gripped wondering what the heck was going to happen to them, to the story, to everything. Incredible. I loved it. If you haven't read it yet, please do. Now, I could not possibly talk about the highlights of my year without talking about the book that I did my very first read-along with, and that was Burial Rites by Hannah Kent. In July, we had our very first read-along, and we had some 30 plus people join us for the read-along. Many of us were reading it for the first time, and I think everyone enjoyed it. I don't think anyone came away from this experience thinking that was a book I did not want to read. So this was a debut novel for Australian author Hannah Kent, and it was published in 2013. So this is a story of a woman named Agnes Magnusdotter, and she has been found guilty and convicted of murdering her master. And this story is actually inspired by the true story of the last woman who was executed in Iceland in 1829. So Agnes has been given this death sentence, and before the execution date is set, before she gets that information, she is sent away to live with a district officer and his family on their farm. And she's living with them in exchange for her providing labour on the farm. The book is from a few perspectives, and one of them is Agnes, and it's her inner dialogue rather than her spoken dialogue. And it was phenomenal. It was some of the most beautiful writing I had read. And it was actually, Rapture I felt like it was a little similar to Emily Maguire's writing and how it made me feel, probably more than how it was actually done. But Agnes's narration, her inner dialogue was just incredibly moving. And then we also have other perspectives. There is a priest named Totti who has been chosen by Agnes to be the spiritual guide to help her prepare for death. And then another perspective is from the mother and wife of the family that Agnes is living with on this farm. And all of these perspectives really did complement each other. It was so well done. As Totti and the Johnson family spend more time with Agnes, who is very somber, she's resigned to the fact she's going to die, but as they spend more time with her, they start to realise there might be more to her story than the sensational gossip that has been going around since this murder and since her conviction. It has a lot of themes around gender and equality, especially in this period in Iceland, which was very patriarchal, and it illustrates the lack of power that women had in that society. It raises questions around justice, injustice, the fairness of the Icelandic justice system at the time, and also themes around identity and perception. It's an interesting book because you know she's going to die. It's based on the true story of a woman who was executed. You know it's going to happen, and yet you are so caught up in this atmosphere, the vivid landscape of Iceland, and the characters really jump off the page. The writing is sublime, very sophisticated and descriptive. But Kent's metaphors, her similes, her pacing, her inner dialogue of Agnes, and it's a debut novel. Incredible, absolutely incredible. Kent dedicated many, many years to researching this book, and if you want a truly unique reading experience, I highly recommend you read Burial Rites, then you pick up Hannah Kent's memoir, Always Homesick, Always Home, Always Homesick, which was released in 2025. This is not especially in my list of books that I'm saying was the best for my year, but the experience of reading Burial Rites and then going on to read Always Home, Always Homesick was an incredible experience. Hannah Kent was an exchange student to Iceland from Australia when she was a teenager, or in her late teens, 18 I think. And this is her memoir of her time on exchange, of how she came across the story of Agnes Magnusdóttir, how she came to write her first novel, and then the reception of that novel in Australia, the world, but also amongst the people of Iceland, because she was writing a story of theirs and she was not Icelandic. So I think this was a phenomenal memoir, but when paired with burial rites, it is such a great experience. I highly recommend you do both of them in tandem. And for those of you that did join the read along, I will be doing another one, and I think I'm looking in February. I've got a book in mind, but I just want to double check. Okay, another non-fiction book, which is another memoir, is Janelle Miller's Know My Name. It's always difficult to rate non-fiction, and especially when it's a personal memoir like this is, but this was just a book that had me gripped from cover to cover. It is a book that is very challenging at times. It deals with very sensitive content. But I guess I felt that if Janelle Miller was able to have these discussions, then perhaps I would be okay to hear her tell her story and reclaim her story. So Janelle Miller was originally known as Emily Doe, and there was a court trial that took place through 2015-2016 of Brock Turner, who was found guilty of sexually assaulting Janelle at Stanford University. And she gave her victim statement. Her statement went viral. And first of all, it gave a name to her, who throughout the trial was known as this anonymous victim. But she reclaimed her story through this statement, and it also showed the world that she was a really, really good writer. And she really won people over while she reclaimed her story. So in this memoir, Janelle takes us through the assault, the aftermath, the trial, but it also goes back into her own past. She tells the story of her childhood and of her life and who she is and the people that mean things to her in her life. And so it is a memoir in its truest form. It's not just about this experience, this horrible experience that she had, but who she was at the time of the assault and who she was after the trial. And it really does have a lot of conversation around the unfairness of the judicial system and how it is often very much falling short of protecting those most vulnerable people that need protection, and that it is another patriarchal culture that often protects or has a bias towards the perpetrator. It's really beautiful and profound for the sensitive content that's in here. This was really, really incredible to read. And this is one of those books that I feel that everyone should read simply because you are a citizen on planet Earth, and everyone should understand this experience that she went through and the things that she saw and the things that she's experienced. Somehow it became incredibly hopeful at the end, and Janelle Miller is just a wonderful writer. Really raw, really well written, very inspiring. Now, the last book, the 8th book that I'm sharing in my highlights of 2025 is probably going to come as no surprise to you guys, because I've been banging on about it since I read it back in September. And that is Red Dog by Louis de Bernières. Red Dog holds a very special place in my heart for a number of reasons. One of which is that I spent the first 21 years of my life in this area where the book is set. And so there's a lot of nostalgia for me around the location, the people, the stories, even though a lot of the stuff in here took place well before I was born. Red Dog is a work of fiction, but it is based on a real dog named Red Dog, who also went by a number of other names, who was a travelling dog in the Pilbara, which is the northwest of Western Australia, and this was throughout the 70s. Red Dog didn't really have an owner. He kind of adopted people as he went along in his travels, and everyone got to know him and came to know, oh, that's Red Dog. People would feed him if he turned up. They would take him to the vet if he was unwell. They would give him rides from town to town, and he just kind of became legendary in the Pilbara. So Louis de Bernières, who is the author of Captain Corelli's Mandolin, he came to Perth in the late 90s, I think it was, for a writers' festival. And as part of that festival, he went from Perth up to Karratha, which is the Pilbara region, for some other portions of the festival. And this is where he came across the story of Red Dog, and he wanted to know more. So he came back a few years later, and he went back up to Karratha and just did a lot of research. And eventually he came up with this teeny tiny little book. I don't even think it's 100 pages, 114 pages. At the beginning of the book, de Bernières does say that it is a work of fiction and many of the characters are inventive, except for one character, John, who was as close as you could come to an owner of Red Dog. They really did kind of become two peas in a pod. This is laugh out loud funny. This is heartwarming, heart-wrenching at times. And when I finished this book, one of the first things I thought of was, who can I buy this book for? Because that was a phenomenal experience. I really wanted to share it with everyone. And so this year I've bought it for a few people as a Christmas present. It's not a big spoiler because I don't have a lot of family watching my YouTube channel. I think it's just my mum and my husband that watch it. This was the feel-good read that I wanted when I said at the start of the year that I didn't want books that were too heavy and that would drag me down. This was the book I was looking for. And so I highly recommend it. Even if you're a cat person, there is a story in here about a cat. It's just brilliant. I loved it so much. And de Bernières did an incredible job writing this book. Like, if I did not know de Bernières, I did not know who he was or where he was from, I would think this was written by an Australian. The cadence, the language, the slang, the narration, the blokey narration was as true blue as you could really get. It was so well done. I think he did a wonderful job. And at the end of the book, there is actually like a little glossary of some Australian slang, so you can get a bit of like a little bit of a dictionary, if you like. And I do want to mention, of all of the months, I think September, when I read Red Dog, was probably one of the best reading months I had. I read The Hounding by Zenobi Purvis, This House of Grief by Helen Garner, We Have Always Lived in the Castle by Shirley Jackson. I reread The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller, and I read Red Dog and Know My Name by Janelle Miller. So that was a stellar month. That was a really good month of reading, to be honest. So those are the highlights for me for 2025. These are the books that are going to stay on my heart for a long, long time, and I would highly recommend them if you haven't yet read any of them. Thank you so much for joining me on YouTube, whether you've just found me or you've been here for a while. I mean, this would be very boring if you weren't there, like commenting and talking to me and interacting with me. So thank you so much for joining me on this journey. I can't believe we're coming up to 2 years now on YouTube. I started in January 2024, so here it comes around. I'll be taking a few weeks off from today. This is my last video for the year as we go into Christmas and the New Year, and it's actually our summer holidays at the moment, so I'm looking forward to just kind of not doing a lot other than swimming and reading and eating mince pies. But I will be back in late January and I will be sharing with you all of the books that I have read over my summer, and so far it is going very, very well. I've knocked off 2 books of my summer reading list and it's going well. It's going well. So I hope you have a Merry Christmas and a safe and happy New Year, and whatever you are doing, that you have a lot of lovely reading ahead of you. Thanks so much for joining me. I'll see you later. Bye.